Hi guys, Alec, Peirce, Scuba Tech Tips here at Simcoe Diving in Barrie, Ontario. Great dive shop, hydro test facility. It's a 5-star PADI facility. Top-notch instructors, open water, all kinds of training courses, everything right up to instructor. If you get a chance, you're in the Barrie area, make sure you drop in. Say hi to Chris for me. Now you all know, if you've been following my videos at all, that I have done more than a few videos that are what we're going to call technically inclined, meaning that they are related to equipment. And in some cases I've actually described and shown you how to do small bits of service on your equipment, on your regulators and on your BCs, even your pressure gauges and stuff like that. In most of those cases, if you go back and take a look at them, you'll see that I indicated that in the video that I'm not showing you or encouraging you to play with your equipment. Just the opposite. In some cases, I actually use the video to demonstrate that you shouldn't, how complicated it can be. Point is, as we discussed, or as you can see from this topic, whether or not you should service your own gear. Should you service your own gear? Now, I know some of you guys will, regardless of what I say, that's fine, and some of you wouldn't even think about doing it. Your area of expertise lies elsewhere other than mechanical issues. But let's talk about it just very briefly. Should you service your own gear? There are a few misconceptions and a few things you should know before you make that decision. First of all, if you're mechanically inclined, then you probably already have the ability. If you know the difference between a Phillips screwdriver and a Roberts screwdriver, if you know what a nut driver is, if you know what a true vice grip is, and you know the difference between vice grips and channel locks, and you know the difference between a ball peen hammer and a claw hammer and stuff like that, and you've actually used those devices, then in all likelihood you already have enough basic skill and basic knowledge to service a regulator. Regulators, we're not talking a Mars rover here. You know, they're pretty straightforward. Now, they do have some very specific, some very important bits of sophistication. That's where the difficulty comes in. Contrary to popular belief, and I've actually heard this, I've actually heard regulator service people say to me that all regulators are the same. I got news for you. I've been servicing regulators for a very long time, since before 1969. I can't even count that high. many regulators, every make, model, style that you can think of. Two hose right up to the most modern pilot valves. Many brands that are no longer in business. I've serviced them all and worked with them all. Trust me when I tell you that they are not all the same. If you try to take the knowledge that you gained by servicing Sherwood regulators and apply that to Scuba Pro regulators, you're going to be in trouble. Sadly surprised. They're not all the same. Now, you can take training programs on them, and some regulators, particularly the older regulators, by older I mean 25 or more years ago, I'm not talking 1990s, I mean prior to the 1990s, and then a lot of those regulators are very straightforward, very simple, and could be serviced by someone with mechanical abilities. But there's a lot of other things to think about. Most modern regulators, and by modern regulators I mean any regulator in the last 20 years. Let's say that a regulator designed, developed, and sold in the 21st century, in 2000, whatever it is, have changed. Things have changed a great deal. I often sell, and I service, and I sell, and I advise people on how to service old regulators. Just recently, I actually wrote a manual, an owner's manual, on the history and the restoration of a very well-known, very old regulator. It was called the U.S. Divers Aquamatic. That was produced in 1959, count back there. And it was a very popular regulator and an interesting regulator, the first single hose regulator that U.S. Divers made. And I did a manual, an owner's manual. I made one because I didn't have one. There was no owner's manual. Put it on the tank and breathe. Things were pretty simple back then in the 50s and 60s. And I wrote a manual about how to take it apart step by step, how to put it back together. And pretty much anybody with basic mechanical skills should do that on that regulator, all 9 parts. Yeah, you heard that, did you? Because today it's not that way. A typical regulator today could have 25 individual bits and pieces and parts, not like the old regulators. Also, with the much higher pressures that are being used today, and with the greater demands being placed on them by scuba divers, because now you have not only the diver breathing, but you have a safe second, you have a buoyancy compensator, you have submersible pressure gauges, you may have computer transmitters. There's so much more to a regulator now than there was back in the old days, that things have changed a great deal. Now, we have things such as torque values. I don't think in 1959 we even had the word torque. I can't remember. But now, when you reassemble the regulator now, you don't just snug things up snugly. Every nut, bolt, and piece of a modern regulator has a torque value, which means, if you're not entirely sure, and that if you're not entirely sure what torque means, maybe you should just turn this video off and pick another one, because that's one of those basic skills that a mechanically inclined person would know. But torque simply means the amount of force that is placed on a nut or a bolt to tighten it properly. And there's many, many factors that determine that. And each nut and bolt of a modern regulator has a torque value. And to do that properly, you have to have a torque wrench. There's a special wrench with a gauge on the wrench that tells you how much torque you're putting on that nut. You put the right amount. That's just a small example. O-rings, backup rings, sintered filters, all kinds of things now that make reg service much, much more complicated. A trained serviceman will spend as much as 2 days full-time, 2 days full-time learning how to service a specific regulator with factory technicians. At the end of the 2 days, having seen the whole process and done the whole process under supervision, and then done the whole process on his own, you'll get a certificate indicating that he knows how to service that regulator. That process also includes adjusting and measuring the adjustment. And again, that's different. In the old days with the old regulators, essentially, we put the regulator onto a scuba tank, turn on the valve, there's no leaks, put it into our mouth, suck on it, we get air, we're out of here. Not anymore. Now there's so many more factors involved. The inhalation effort, the exhalation effort. I don't know if you know about that, but exhalation effort is a very important factor in modern regulators. The flow rate, so you can draw on it how much air is actually available. The flow rate, how all that is measured using special instruments like the Alec, which measures very sensitive changes inside. It only takes a tiny, I can just blow through here and the needle moves. It takes very, very little bit of movement, very, very sensitive to measure exactly those different air flows in a modern regulator. Also, another issue that it has to be kept is that many of the parts and the processes in the disassembly and the assembly of a modern regulator require special tools. Sure, you can use your vice grips and your hacksaw, and even if you get a fancy pair, because there are quite a few snap rings in modern regulators too, get a fancy set of snap rings and pliers, and a lot of those things are common tools. But in many, many cases, you have to have a special tool. This is a specially made tool. Very precisely made, hard plastic openings and closings, right-sized ends on it. Here's another example. And without this tool, you cannot properly assemble a Marais regulator. There's all kinds of examples of the same thing. This particular tool is especially made to allow you to insert the backup ring and the O-ring into the deep recess in the first stage. Without this, you can't do it. Trying to do it with other tools, with screwdrivers or other things, you'll ruin the backup ring or the O-ring, or scratch the brass coating on. So, special tools. And those special tools are not hard to get, but for someone who isn't certified or working in a training facility, it becomes very difficult. Now we talk about parts. You have to get the proper parts. You can get a lot of generic parts. There's quite a few. You can get generic O-rings, and you can get some filters and some seats as well. But if it's a modern regulator, again, talking later than the year 2000, then it's going to be very difficult if you get the parts. And part of the reason for that is it isn't that the manufacturers and dive stores are trying to stop you from servicing your regulator. It's that there's a liability problem. If you can get the parts and you service your own regulator, and there's an issue, a problem, and you get hurt, heaven forbid you get hurt, it can come back to the company. So So there are good reasons why they restrict the access to parts and tools to people who are trained to use them. One company, Peirce, big company, well known, she has a toolbox. This is Peirce toolbox, and you have to purchase this, and trust me, it's not inexpensive. And in here are a whole bunch of tools that you will not find at Princess Auto. You will not find this at the Home Depot. You will not find these tools at Harbor Freight. Absolutely not. You walk into Harbor Freight and you say, I need a tool for inserting the high pressure hard seat in a Peirce MR22. The guy will look at you. Now, if you're a scuba diver, he'll say, well, I know what the Peirce 22 is, but I know nothing about tools. So there's a lot of things to consider. And after all of that, doing it properly, getting it back together and doing it properly so that the end result is you have a properly serviced regulator that can safely take you or your buddy or someone else diving. A lot of things to consider. Now, once again, I'm not saying you should not service your own regulator. I'm simply putting some of the factors out there that you need to consider, you need to think about before you attempt to do that. What you do is, of course, entirely up to you, but it's an important thing to consider. As far as servicing, your local dive store. They have trained people who spend money and time learning how to do it properly. They do a good job, and they will be happy to take your regulator once a year, or once every 2 years, whatever it requires, depending on the usage, and service it properly. If you're really interested and mechanically inclined, speak to the service manager and see if he'll let you watch. See if he'll let you take part in the servicing of your. Sometimes he'll do that. And I used to do that quite often when I was doing a lot of service a few years back, and I enjoyed it. And the people learned. In many cases, they learned that they should bring it to the dive store to have it done. Yeah. So anyway, there you go, guys. I'm not preaching. I'm simply trying to present some of the ins and outs. Some of the comments we have there are from fellows who said, "Oh, I service my own rig all the time." Wonderful. If you know what you're doing, and if you're very, very careful. I just wanted you to think about a few more things. Okay, there you go. Should you service your own regulator? Really, it's entirely up to you. I don't think so. I don't. I have a modern regulator for myself and Diana. I don't service it. I certainly could. Tools, experience, and parts. Now, take it to a pro. Let him do it properly. He has all the instrumentation to test it. He hands it back to me, and I know that my wife and I can dive safely with that gear. That's something to think about. Anyway, have a good time. Be careful diving. Alec, Peirce, Scuba Tech Tips. Take care.